Okay, so first I will share my screen. Go into present mode. Does that look good to everyone? I can no longer see you, so I will just assume that it does.
All good.
Okay.
That's great.
Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Catherine, and I'm a UX researcher for the development section. And so today I'm giving a talk about UX research for the create stage. I'm filling in for some of our designers. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and get started. So I wanted to start it off with some context for Create's role in the dev section direction. So I added a link to the product direction page where you can see Dev's product direction strategy for this year. And so I just wanted to zoom in on Create. And basically, features in the Create stage, such as source code management or code review, are often an entry point for new customers migrating to GitLab. So once a user starts to use things like repositories and merge requests, they often start to explore other capabilities of GitLab, such as issues or CI. And so Create is often at the center of those types of decision makings and things like that. And so there are connections between merge requests and issues, compliance, security, and other areas that are really important to a lot of our users. And so because of that, Create is in a position where there's a lot of maintenance needed for existing product areas, as this is an area of GitLab that's been around very long, but also driving forward new aspects of our product vision and kind of iterating on the vision for code review and things like that. And so UX research has been a part of helping the team make iterative changes while also exploring new opportunities. So if you're wondering, how do I start doing UX research? I believe there's a lot of value in understanding what you do know before you start searching for answers to what you don't know. So whether you're evaluating various design proposals, gathering data on how common a problem is, testing the usability of a proposed solution, or even just exploring new workflows and new groups of users, the first step is often to figure out what you need to learn from the research and why. So you can see here just some of the common questions that we tend to ask ourselves throughout a research project. I skipped my talking slide. So what kind of UX research can I do? So as part of the problem validation and solution validation aspects of our product development flow, we tend to focus more on user interviews and usability testing and surveys. So I just wanted to give a shout out to some other things you might consider as well, and the training article about choosing the right methodology. So basically, your research method will depend on your questions, goals, and objectives, because you're trying to figure out the way that you need to present information to your participant in order to get the data that you need back from them. So I just wanted to highlight some recent research efforts in the Create stage to show an example of the type of research you can do. So I'll start off with merge request approval rules. We did some moderated usability testing there. And so the context for this was that during a UX scorecard initiative for evaluating the flow of creating a merge request, our Create designers found some things that were a little bit off about the merge request approval rules in that creation page for merge request. And then they decided to take a step back and look at the feature as a whole and just get kind of like a baseline assessment of the experience. And so we decided to do moderated usability testing with 5 GitLab users who were familiar with the MR approvals feature, but even that varied a bit to some people who were super familiar with it, some people who heard of it, but hadn't really interacted with it that much because they didn't have it available to them. But just people who knew what it was to start with. And so we learned a lot of different things from that study. It was a very interesting thing. I think some of the key things that came out were that when you have settings, when you have the option to enable a feature in settings, sometimes people might look for it outside of that location. So they might look for it in the left sidebar, looking at the merge request page, rather than thinking to go to settings, repository, settings general, and looking under there for the actual setting to turn on the feature. So that was something that was key to us, because that's really important for the discoverability aspect of the feature before you can even get started with it. And so then also, when creating a merge request, some users thought it made more sense to attach the appropriate approvable instead of reducing the numbers required to 0. So there were some interactions that seemed to take extra steps rather than a more direct or efficient way to do it. And then basically, we also came up with some other discussion points, like understanding if I'm assigned to multiple approvables, do I need to approve them one by one? Or can it be assumed that I'm approving them from all the different groups I might be part of all at once? Or discussion around how to know who is in the group you're assigning to that merge request approval rule, or things like that. And so what came out of that was an epic with some suggested iterative changes we can make to the merge request approval rules feature. And I added that in the notes of the slides if you're interested in checking that out. And yeah, so that was an interesting study, and that involved usability testing. And so the next study is about the multi-file snippets view. And so we decided to do a preference test and a first click test for this one. And basically, Marcel had created an initial design proposal for creating multi-file snippets. But then after iterating on it a bit, he came up with another idea. And so what he wanted to do was test the two ideas and see which one was preferred by GitLab users, and also why they were preferred by GitLab users. So we went with a design evaluation created in Usability Hub and distributed this to users via Twitter or GitLab First Look, LinkedIn, and things like that. So you can see the different versions of the design, but for the sake of this presentation, I wasn't really able to put them all on here. But this is the gist of it. You have version A, where you're creating, you're adding multi-files in a way that's kind of stacked, and then version B, where it looks kind of more like an IDE feel to it. And so what we learned from this was that the vast majority of participants preferred the version B design, both for adding multiple files and for creating a new snippet. And also for the click test, participants were able to click on the right area for deleting a file, but there was also feedback on what could make that more intuitive for them as well. So down here I put, it's not just about what they prefer, it's also why they prefer it. And so for context, there are actually a lot of different opinions. Even though the majority voted for B, version A actually had a lot of different arguments. So what it came down to was the different use cases. So for people who don't add very many files, who don't want to add very many files to a snippet, they were interested in a bigger space for editing their files and a simpler overview rather than having to go back between the different tabs, just being able to see it all on one place, say they're only adding 2 files. So that was kind of the main argument for version A for people who don't really do that, add a lot of files. And so you can see here in this quote, I believe for up to 3 to 5 short files, this should be enough. Otherwise, I would pick the file picker. So the decision kind of had a caveat. It might be good for if I have just 3 to 5 files on this page, but if I have more than that, it might become a bit unruly and I need the other option. And similarly, for version B, concerns were mainly around having less scrolling, make it easier to switch, and that it also felt similar to other editors, such as Visual Studio Code. And it might be better for adding a lot of files. So those are some of the quotes there. But you see here we have another one with a caveat. It has less scrolling involved, but if the second option, so if this option had expandable blocks, this might be a tough decision for them. So basically what they're saying there is if there were some tweaks here, maybe, I think here it might be like if these blocks could somehow be collapsed and expanded, then that might make the decision difficult for them. So it was very interesting to read through all the feedback and kind of see the importance of considering the use cases that you're solving for when you read that feedback and take it in. So for example, in this multi-file snippet implementation, we're currently giving people the option to add up to 10 files in design. But what I think would be interesting to track after it's implemented is to see how many files people add on average, to kind of see what is the typical behavior around that and what is our goal for the feature. So yeah, that was my it depends slide. And a bonus point, people often give a variety of different feedback just in one study. So always be sure to read through all the results, or you might read through the first 10 and they're saying, this looks great, I think you should implement it. But then the next 10 are saying, actually, here are all these other considerations. So I just kind of put together different comments that were kind of contradicting, all from the same study. And lastly, because I'm almost done with time, here's just another example of what you can do if you're not doing a usability study or user interviews or other types of research. You might just dive right into our GitLab issue tracker and start pulling out feedback from the community issues. So reading comments, finding use cases and things like that, and mapping them out into different buckets. So talking about pain points, suggested improvements, missing capabilities, things like that. You can start right from your issue tracker and see what people are saying directly there. And so for the context of that, we were doing that for the case of the wiki. We had done a little bit of research in the past, so we didn't need to start from scratch on user interviews. And what I mainly found from there is that for wiki, the key thing to keep in mind is that people are working on it from both an engineering and non-engineering perspective. So the core goal is to have a way for people to easily access this wiki, whether they're comfortable with GitLab or not. So that brings in considerations about roles and permissions, and also the ease of the editing experience and how things are structured in the wiki as well. So I just included some common use cases and top feature requests for wiki as well, because it is one of the most buzzing features in the issue tracker, along with snippets. So fun fact. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you for your time. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask me now or follow up in chat. And I will pass it on to, I don't know, but I will look and see.
I think it's Ian next. But before you do, I wanted to say, Catherine, this was awesome. Thank you so much for going through this. I know there are a lot of questions right now about like what types of methodologies can we use, what's valid, and I think that you did a really good job of showing there's a lot of different ways we can do things. It really depends on what you want to do. So thank you. That was excellent.
Thank you. Thank you for going through that with me. That was really fun, actually.